Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is how I've stopped counting how many times people stop me, call me, text me, email me to ask the question. What is the question? It may be phrased in different ways, but the pain the question evokes, the fear from which it emanates, the disbelief that it even has to be raised is shared by everyone. The question is, do I think that there is a future for Jews in the United States? Only someone living in a cave would not know that the recent past has seen a dramatic spike in violence against Jews in the United States. Only someone living in a complete state of denial could deny the uptick in Jew hatred. The violence has been certainly directed at visible Jews, at Jews looking Jewish. They look like Jews, and the Jews who live in traditionally Jewish neighborhoods. But these are only some of the victims. There are many other victims. And there have been incidents at places of work, on campuses, in schools, and on the airwaves, and in public forums. Verbal abuse of Jews has come spilling forth by public personalities and by politicians. The ADL has a website blog that keeps track of anti-Semitic incidents. The incidents documented here are not limited to high-profile Jewish populations like New York, Florida, or California. These attacks have taken place in Middle America, in Minnesota, in Virginia, in Colorado, in Nebraska, in Connecticut. These are a few recent examples. Be warned, they are not for the faint of heart. On May 23rd, in Redondo Beach, California, a synagogue received an anti-Semitic and harassing email from an unknown sender who wrote, "Die effing Jew, cockroaches, Israel equals racism, apartheid, genocide." On May 22nd, in New York City, a Jewish man wearing a Star of David necklace was punched by a man who allegedly asked him, "What is that around your neck? Does that mean you're an effing Zionist?" May 22nd in Brooklyn, 3 men allegedly drove around Borough Park harassing and assaulting Jewish individuals, including teenagers. They yelled anti-Semitic slurs as well. Free Palestine. The men also kicked the synagogue doors and broke a car mirror. There's video of all of these, of many of these things. There's a video of that one. On May 20th in New York City, a Jewish man was beaten by a group of anti-Israel protesters in Times Square. In another incident, anti-Zionist protesters shouted, "Effin' Zionist," and threw fireworks at passers-by, injuring one in Midtown Manhattan's Diamond District, which is home to many Jewish-owned businesses. On May 18th in LA, a group of Jewish diners at a kosher restaurant were allegedly assaulted by a group of individuals. The attackers reportedly arrived in cars carrying Palestinian flags and yelled anti-Semitic slurs. All of us have seen that video also. It was heart-wrenching. May 18th in Bal Harbor in Florida, right next to Surfside. A Jewish family was walking home from synagogue when they were harassed by a group of individuals in a car who allegedly yelled, "Free Palestine, F the Jews, die Jews." On June 28th, Denver, Colorado, at least 15 cars were vandalized with graffiti that included swastikas and messages like "Land of Nazi" and the M-word. June 28th, in Lincoln, Nebraska, two cars were found vandalized with swastikas and racial slurs. June 24th, Goldman Sachs building in Battery Park City was vandalized with stickers of Israeli flags that were redesigned to look like a swastika. On June 24th, police reported that racist and anti-Semitic graffiti was found painted on an abandoned truck and boat overnight on Thursday. June 23rd, Ukiah, California, a mural in downtown Ukiah was defaced with swastikas and SS lightning bolts. June 22nd, Woodbridge, Virginia, Jewish Temple of Congregation Ner Shalom received a threatening anti-Semitic voicemail. June 22nd, New Haven, Connecticut, New Haven Jewish Community Center was evacuated and closed after receiving a threat. June 22nd in Fort Lauderdale, during the Zoom court hearing, a court hearing of a known white supremacist, Paul Miller, several unknown viewers began making anti-Semitic and racist comments in and during the court session on the Zoom. June 22nd, in Nassau, New York, anti-Semitic hate mail was received by State Senator Anna Kaplan. June 22nd, in Scandia, Minnesota, a swastika was found spray painted on the back of a van. On June 21st, in LA again, a Jewish man was dropping off his children at a bus stop when a pedestrian began yelling anti-Semitic slurs at him. I have an answer to the question. That question is it safe to live in America? For a Jew to live in America? My answer is yes. I do think that there is a future for Jews in the United States. But to ensure that future, we, the Jews of America, cannot be complacent. We cannot assume that with time the situation will change, for the better at least. We cannot and should not flee. It is essential for the American Jewish community to build strong alliances with those other Americans who are willing and unafraid to publicly condemn the vile and heinous physical and verbal attacks against Jews. People with standing, people with conscience, people with moral barometers, people whose voices are loud enough to be heard. The power of the courts must be brought into our battle, especially when the hatred comes from institutions, from schools, and from places of work. Justice is on our side. For too many people, it has become acceptable, under the guise of racial sensitivity, to be atonal about Jewish hatred. Too many Americans have succumbed to the erroneous and irrational theory that Jews are white and thus the oppressor, and have no right, therefore, to complain about Jew hatred. That's simply not true. We must combat and correct that untruth. The only way to deal with the level and this level of physical and verbal Jew hatred that we are witnessing at this moment in our lives in the United States, that we are living through, is to enlist good, fair, ethical friends of Jews to stand up and condemn the violence and the messages. These need to be leaders of non-Jewish communities, cultural leaders, entertainers, media personalities, politicians, religious leaders. All of them must be enlisted to stand up and condemn these hateful messages. They need to condemn it without exceptions and without qualifications. We need to present an alternative message to the world, a positive message, an image of Jews working together with non-Jews to achieve mutually beneficial goals. People who sign on to help us with regard to this need not agree with the entire mainstream Jewish agenda about Israel or about the Palestinians. They need to just focus on this evil, the evil of Jew hatred. We cannot sink to the level of those who abuse us. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an editorial from JNS News. It was published on June 28, 2021. The editorial was written by Jonathan Tobin. It is entitled Brandeis U Takes Woke Language Policing to New Depths of Stupidity. This column is about the new woke language. Woke language advocates that certain words and phrases that are not permitted at Brandeis, or for that matter, at most colleges and universities today in the United States. Tobin begins. Brandeis University got some unwanted publicity last week when its oppressive words list became public. The list, created by students and published by the school's Prevention Advocacy and Resource Center, is a lexicon of forbidden words that takes woke language policing to new depths of idiocy. Avoiding these words, the university says, will prevent those who have experienced violence from being further hurt. The rules aren't mandatory, but by allowing the list to be circulated on an official site, Brandeis has lent its authority to a thought-stifling mechanism. A tragic turn of events for a school named after Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, an ardent free speech champion. Tobin gives examples of the forbidden words. You will probably be shocked at what made its way onto this list and the reasons they are on the list itself. Tobin writes, among the verboten words, picnic, because of a bogus claim that the word is associated with anti-black lynchings in the South, and trigger warning, because the word trigger might evoke violence. Who knew that college professors issued trigger warnings in their syllabi were actually triggering their traumatized students? It got worse this week when Gabriel Brom, a respected scholar and a fellow at the Brandeis Summer Institute for Israel Studies, was warned not to post about the controversy on the school listserv. Brahm declared that he would withdraw from further participation on the forum rather than be censored on a site ostensibly dedicated to discussion of political controversies. Tobin now brings Joyce Carol Oates, her Twitter comments about the language police at Brandeis. Oates is an icon, and people on the left know this. She's a guru for the left. She was very displeased with the language restrictions. Tobin writes about Joyce Carol Oates in the following way. No wonder even some old school liberals are speaking out. Feminist literary icon Joyce Carol Oates poked fun at the list, noting that while it bans picnic, it doesn't ban the word lynch itself, or any number of other actually racist terms. The stupidity of the list's content deserves some extended treatment. The document recapitulates a long debunked claim that the expression rule of thumb stems from the justification for violence against women. An 18th century English judge runs the canard called a rule of thumb. His judgment that a rod as thick as a thumb is permissible for use by husbands disciplining their wayward wives. Tobin brings more examples of forbidden words. Truly, this is a list over the top and ridiculous. He continues, the document also seeks to erase from conversation such inoffensive language as take a shot at, killing it, you guys, ladies and gentlemen, no can do, as well as objectively descriptive terms such as prostitute, addict, mentally ill, homeless, wheelchair-bound, and even victim and survivor, on the dubious grounds that they are hurtful. Tobin concludes with a clear and simple resolution. He explains that something has to be done, and he writes, it's time for professors and students to stand up to the radical bullies who are driving this insanity. The censors may start with what they call bad language, but in the long run, the real target of these would-be tyrants is every American's freedom of speech. Thank you, Jonathan Tobin. This is an excellent piece. Next up is a column from Times Now of India. It was published on June 29, 2021. Times Now of India is the second largest media company and TV station in all of India. Now, considering there are 1,450,000,000 people in India, that's a lot. The column is entitled, Will Israel's New Government Revive Ties with Turkey? The subtitle is, Israel has tipped the balance against its isolation in the Eastern Mediterranean in recent years by striking a deal to form the Hellenic Alliance. This column was written by Barsu Ozalelik, a research fellow at the University of Cambridge. She begins, with Naftali Bennett now Prime Minister, Israel's foreign policy direction has been under scrutiny. Eyes are locked on how politically divisive issues like West Bank settlements, peace with the Palestinians, and religious secular relations will be handled by the fragile eight-party coalition. Is a strategic foreign policy reorientation possible? Coalition members certainly want this. So far, however, little in the way of the new government's intentions are clear across a range of geographies and interests. Within such an atmosphere, the question of revitalizing ties between Israel and Turkey has, unsurprisingly, emerged in recent weeks. Only don't bet on it. She goes on to explain that the Middle East is changing, and Israel is part of that change. She writes, Israel has tipped the balance against the isolation in the Eastern Mediterranean in recent years by striking a deal to form the Hellenic Alliance. This aligns Israel with Greece, along with Cyprus, Egypt, Italy, Jordan, and Palestine, all members of the Cairo-based East Mediterranean Gas Forum. The UAE signed on in December as an observer, largely as a rebuke to Turkey's ambitions in the region. Ankara was never invited to join either the forum or the alliance. The point that is being made with this column is that Israel and Turkey should get their relationship back on track. And this is how the column concludes. She writes, in the last decade, Israel cultivated new allies. Turkey, once seen as an indispensable interlocutor, is met with greater caution today. Indeed, many new friends of Israel are likely to urge against reinvigorating relations with Turkey. So while Bennett may be keen to show some foreign policy independence from Netanyahu, Israel's larger interest, and Turkey's desire for leadership in Palestine, but against the goal for the two largest Middle East powers on the Eastern Mediterranean to form closer ties. The possibility is there, but the momentum to take a leap of faith is not. This is a very interesting analysis and worth thinking about. I'll do more on this later on. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 memes and cartoons today. The first meme is actually a real headline. It reads, "Thousands climb Indonesian volcano for annual sacrifice." People actually do some very silly and downright stupid and idiotic things for entertainment. Climbing a volcano, an active volcano. This is another headline. It is about fashion from the Middle Ages. The headline reads, "Fashion for pointy shoes unleashed plague of bunions in medieval Britain." Ouch, that must have hurt. But you can all see those pointy shoes in all the artwork. This next item is so funny, I thought that it was fake. I researched, and indeed this really actually happened, exactly as that headline reads. The backstory is that Oakland defunded the police and established a violence prevention group, which is supposed to talk to people about excessive violence. A media crew gathered for a press interview, and the headline reads, "Armed robbers held up news crew as it interviewed Oakland's chief of violence prevention." That's funny. The next is an ad for a veggie burger, but it really is not, or is it? In big letters on the label is listed real beef. A veggie burger that contains real beef? Of course. These are not real veggie burgers at all, but it's funny. This next makes fun and makes a hilarious point about the Millennium anti-theft policy. It's an anti-theft device, so to speak. This millennial anti-theft device, you'll see in the picture, is a stick shift. Millennials simply never needed to learn how to drive a stick shift. I loved my stick shift cars, and it was really hard to give them up. This one is one of the signs that make you scratch your head. The picture is a street sign that reads 21st Street. The meme writer writes, "Forget about what the idiot did. I'm just fascinated I spent 30 minutes trying to pronounce it." What makes it even more funny is that he left out the letter S in fascinated. So we can laugh at him too. This last item is a sign posted in a synagogue in Jerusalem. This particular synagogue is actually a revolving door of services. It never really closes. During the day, at its peak, there might be 6 different minyanim or prayer groups operating at the very same time. They are open 24/7. They don't close. At 2 a.m., you'll find a quorum of 10 men praying and saying Kaddish. I have translated the sign. It reads, "I'm hot, I'm cold. There is yet to be born a Gabbai who knows how to regulate the temperature for everyone. We have done all we can. If you are hot, sit next to the AC. If you're cold, bring a sweater." A reality. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. 24 Israelis were arrested in Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport recently. They weren't arrested for drug trafficking, they weren't arrested for smuggling, they were actually arrested for buying tickets and almost boarding a plane for Russia. Almost. 4 the other Israelis were fined 5,000 shekel each, that's approximately $2,000, for getting off a plane from Russia and trying to enter Israel. Russia is a red state. COVID is rampant there. It's forbidden for Israelis to come or go without special permission from the Exceptions Committee. You can't go to Russia if you're in Israel. It might sound like Israel is becoming a police state, but the truth is that Israel is a country that takes life and death of its citizens very seriously. No travel means no travel unless you get the exceptions. The head of IDF search and rescue team in Florida is a gentleman named Colonel Gideon or Gidon Vach. Vach has been speaking to U.S. media outlets and explaining what the Israeli team is doing in Surfside and the value added by having Israelis on the ground at the site of the Champlain South building collapse. Colonel Vach has been working search and rescue missions for more than 20 years. When speaking of Surfside and the rescue operation, he said, and I'm quoting here, "It's one of the most difficult and complicated situations that I've ever seen," unquote. He said that while one should never lose hope, you also have to be honest, and there is no chance for finding survivors. Vach described the 3D model of the Champlain that Israel created even before arriving on the scene. He explained that the team is looking for the bedrooms because people were asleep at the time of the collapse. He also explained that the Israeli team replicated the collapse in the model, on the computer model, to determine how the building fell. And then he said, our purpose is to get the first responders to understand where exactly they're digging. That's important. In this way, the rescuers do not waste time and energy digging and removing rubble. Instead, they can target specifically their dig where they can find bodies. Now the entire building has been demolished to help find the many bodies that are still missing. They're called incendiary balloons. In other words, the balloons sent over from Gaza which ignite and cause fires in Israel. It's a terrible situation. These fires cause tens of millions of dollars of damage. They destroy crops and fields, endanger farming communities. The balloons, they're bombs actually, are very low tech. In fact, it costs less than $1 to make each one of them. They're one of the least expensive weapons in the Middle East today. An X-Acto knife is more expensive. On May 21st, the latest conflict between Gaza and Israel ended. Both sides agreed to cease fire. And yet, these incendiary balloons are being launched with more and more frequency. If they do not end, if the balloons do not stop, Israel will respond. And I just don't mean a few rockets shot back. This is not a prediction, it is an absolute inevitability. Israel will strike Gaza from the air, hit the labs that make the balloons. Israel will target the leaders of the groups launching the balloons. They will shoot the people who are launching the balloons at the very moment that they're being launched. This is an absolute fact. Hamas must know it. And so, I ask, why does Hamas insist on continuing to launch fire balloons into Israel? The answer is that Hamas has a need to always attack Israel. They simply cannot stop. It is a real-life version of the Aesop fable about the scorpion and the frog. Widespread electrical blackouts are crippling Iran. The heat is excessive, air conditioners are running round the clock, people are staying indoors and they are on their computers, using more electricity. This story was first covered by Iran International, a TV and web media outlet out of London. It's independent, it's privately owned. The outlet is trying to present balanced and insightful coverage of Iran. I use it all the time, I rely on it very often. Large parts of the Iranian capital of Tehran and parts of Karaj, a city west of Tehran, as well as other smaller cities, were plunged into darkness. Iranian leaders are announcing that there will be more blackouts. But this widespread blackout, which started, let's say, at 11 p.m. on Saturday night, was not part of scheduled power cuts that Iran has experienced in recent months due to insufficient electricity generation and rising demand. In some parts of Tehran, the power outage continued until 5 a.m., and this the entire evening. An unexpected and long power cut in midsummer high temperatures could create discomfort in apartments where air conditioning is essential, as well as unforeseen problems in hospitals. The scheduled power cut was supposed to take place only between 8 and 10 p.m., but it ended up taking a lot more time. Iran's power consumption this summer has topped 60,000 megawatts per day. That is more than 10% increase in power consumption compared to last year. Meanwhile, electricity generation in Iran has remained the same, 50 to 56,000 megawatts. That's a huge disparity. None of this bodes well for the people of Iran. The people, not the government. The internet lit up with reports that Iran attacked an Israeli vessel in the Indian Ocean. The vessel was en route from Jeddah to the United Arab Emirates. Israeli News N12 broadcast the story. According to N12 report, the crew was not hurt and the ship was not badly damaged. They cited unnamed sources within Israel's defense establishment for this information. Lebanese pro-Iranian TV channel Al Mayadeen also reported that the ship was attacked in the Indian Ocean. This is a big story. It's very difficult to police and protect the high seas. Something is going to change. Israel is going to operate differently on the high seas. The United States seized 36 Iranian websites. The seized sites were shut down. Simple as that. Why these websites? Because they were spreading lies and drawing people into their traps. A few days later, the sites were resurfaced under a different address. They were pretty easy, just like they always do. So the question begs asking, is it really a good idea for the United States to remove Iranian websites? One thing is for certain, that it is certainly plays into the narrative that the United States controls everything, even the internet. The best way to combat rhetoric is to replace it with better material, not by shutting its sources down. Censorship is never a good idea, even when you disagree with them, unless a website goes over that red line that limits free speech. That red line is a direct instigation of violence. Really evil groups use the dark web, and unfortunately, by their very nature, it is impossible to shut them down. The United States should certainly monitor these sites, sometimes even play with them and hack them, maybe even spoof them. But I don't think taking them down is the right answer. I don't think so, because it's censorship. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, tell me what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. I mentioned a gabbai earlier, or a gabbai. In Yiddish, gabbai. In Hebrew, gabbai. The gabbai is a very important position in the Jewish community. There are synonyms for gabbai. Shamash, parnes are two synonyms. In English, we use them. We use the term sexton or beadle. That's beadle. Once upon a time, there was actually a difference between these jobs, the shamash and the parnes and the gabbai. But the gabbai actually really means a tax collector. But today, the gabbai actually runs the service, making certain that services run smoothly. The gabbai calls up the aliyot, arranges for prayer leaders, stands next to the Torah during the Torah reading service. A Hasidic Rebbe also has a gabbai, a personal gabbai. This gabbai is actually more of a chief of staff. He's the Rebbe's gatekeeper. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.